Winging It is a show by Oddbird about web design, development, and our approach to solving problems. On today's show, James will talk to Sandra and I about using a proxy to manage state. Sandra, where should we start?
Well, as a UX designer, I don't know many of the words that you've just said. So I'm going to ask, first of all, there's proxy and state. Let's start with what is state?
Great question, Sandra. So you can think of the state as the parts that are dynamic on a web page. So on a dynamic web page, you have the parts that are going to be static and never change, the page title, column headers, maybe table column headers, things like that. And then there's the parts that actually make it interactive or personalized to that user. You might show the user's name, welcome, James. It might show the items in a shopping cart or even what the user has entered into a form. Those dynamic parts are the state. You can think about it as the known unknowns. For instance, you know the user will have a name and an email address, but you don't necessarily know what they are. If you think about the what the user sees as a function of that state, then it gets interesting when the state actually changes. When a user makes some changes to the state, how does the page know what to do in response, or what does it need to do? So what are some things that a page might need to do in response to some user's action?
Enable a submit button, for example, or let's see, figure out a new price. Like if you're in a shopping cart, you enter a code and then it has to change the price. That would be a thing.
So, like recomputing a computed value. So, like playing off that shopping cart example, if they add more items to the cart, then the price would have to update.
Mhm.
Yeah. Those are all really good examples. I think you know what state is. You might need to
Yay.
display. Yeah, you might need to display a new value by changing the DOM, and sometimes that might be synchronous or asynchronous, or it might happen immediately, or you might have to go off and talk to a server. You also probably need to know the values of different parts of the state. The classic example, I think, is that your total value might be in a shopping cart might be over here on a page, and your list of items are over here, and they kind of need to be able to talk to each other somehow. So this means you kind of have two things to manage. You have the state itself, and then you also have those reactions to the state changing. What do you do next? And then when state can change in multiple ways, and you might have different reactions to different parts of that, things get kind of messy pretty quick.
So, what solutions do you have to unmess that?
Yeah, I think the first thing many people reach for these days is some sort of JavaScript UI library. There might be Svelte, React. There's any number of those. These really provide a lot of really good patterns for handling state, triggering those reactions, updating the DOM in a very performant way. And those are really good tools. But there are also many times when a UI library like that might be a bit overkill. They add complexity to the build process. There's long-term maintenance questions, and they also require the user to load a lot more JavaScript.
So in my job as a UX designer, I'm talking to clients a lot and they say to me, can we do something so that this loading isn't taking so long? Like what's going on here? And I always hear from people like yourself that it's the JavaScript, too much JavaScript is loading. And so then if that happens, it's a really huge concern because people would just leave if something doesn't load fast enough, right? And you won't get the visitors. So
Yeah.
yeah. So does loading lots of JS, is that true? Am I correct that like loading lots of JS really is what's slowing down that
Yeah.
page?
Yeah, that can definitely be a big part of it. I think it can be a double whammy as well, where first you have to wait until a lot of JavaScript comes across the internet to the user's computer, and we don't, or not all users have the blazing fast speeds that we're used to. So it takes a while to get there, and then once it gets to the computer, it actually has to run. And sometimes that can be if it's a really big JavaScript file, and that all has to run before the user sees anything. That can kind of take a long time. Um, Depending on how you have things set up, the page may not actually display anything until everything comes to your computer and then actually runs. There's some ways you can optimize that, but yes, the more JavaScript, generally it'll take longer. For some web apps, the trade-offs, that's something you want to do. There's a lot of really good reasons to that. And for other web apps, no, it's trade-offs really aren't worth it. So yeah, one simpler strategy in some cases is to use JavaScript proxies.
Wow, yeah. So really important to avoid loading tons of JS that you don't need, if there's a way around it. So, okay, now that you've explained what state is and what some of the problems are here, how can you avoid the problems of all this JS loading? And I think you're going to tell us that you can do it with proxies. So what are proxies?
That's a great question. What are proxies? So proxies, here is a very simple proxy trap. And proxies are really just a native part of JavaScript that allow you to customize how an object works. It exposes a lot of the inner workings of JavaScript, so you can do things you normally wouldn't be able to do. So things like you could use a proxy to pretend an object has keys it doesn't actually have, or pretend it doesn't have keys it actually does have. You can pre-parse an argument that you pass into a function. There's all kinds of things that you probably very rarely need to do. They're the tiny screwdriver. I like to think of them as a tiny screwdriver that's in my toolkit. I very rarely use it, but when my kid's little battery-powered car needs a new battery, it's just the right size. So their proxies are specialized tools in your toolbox that you don't really need very often, but when you do need them, they're very, very powerful. So for our purposes here, I have a very simple proxy trap. So we have an object to watch, just an object here that has a key and a value, just to keep things nice and simple. So then we have a watched object, and we are setting up a new proxy on the object to watch, and then setting up the simple set trap, it's called. Basically, every time a new value is set on the watched object, it will run this code. So all we're doing here is we are logging out the property that's being set and its value. And then here's some JavaScript that just basically says, actually set the value how it's supposed to do. If you don't do this, you can actually, you won't change the value. So you're really underneath the hood, kind of intercepting a call, and you have to do what JavaScript would normally do anyways. So what you can see here, I have watched object. I'm setting the key to hello. And so when I set that value, it runs this, and I am logging out down here. The key or the property is key, and the value is hello. And you'll note object to watch, which is the original value. I am changing the same key, but it's not logging anything because this is not a proxied object. This is the original object. It's not changed in any way, just this watched object.
Okay, so we've established what states and proxies are and when you need proxies to manage state. So can you show us how to use them?
Sure. So I have a very simple little app here. First, we'll walk through the DOM, where we have a greeting element. We have a form that has a first and last name. And then we also have radio inputs for forward and reverse. There's also area for output, and then a separate button that you can toggle the direction of this. And ideally, we will output the user's name, the first name in the greeting, and then we will also output their full name, either forward or reverse, and then hook up this button so we can toggle which way it goes. So first, I'll just kind of walk through how you might do it without a proxy. So we have a state object here with first, last, and direction. Those are the kind of core values, the state of what this needs. Everything else is kind of computed based off of these. We won't peek at the proxy yet, but I do have some very simple listeners. So every time the form changes, we're updating the value. Every time we're clicking the toggle button, we're updating the direction. And then I already set up some simple reactions. So what we're doing in response. So when we're rendering the name, we're outputting the name either forward or backwards. We're syncing the direction form so that if the state says it's forward, the forward radio is checked. Otherwise, the reverse is checked. And then we're also outputting the greeting for this render function is for updating the greeting, which says hello and their first name. And then we're also, just so we can see an issue that can come up here, we have a count of how many times that section has been rendered. So what we're going to do first is, currently this doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. This is kind of the intermediate pre-proxy idea. You might say we need to render the name, and we'll just check this. Let's see. Oh yeah, we need to actually load. So now we're rendering the name when it changes, and that also hooks up forward and reverse, and that's great. But we aren't rendering the greeting yet, so we need to add that in. So we'll add that, let it reload, and now when we change this, we updated the greeting. Great. And we set the last name, and what we noticed, this still works, but now every time the form changes, we are re-rendering this title, even though that's not changing. And in this case, it's probably not that big of a deal because it's a very simple code. But if you're doing something like calling a server for more information every time something gets changed, you probably don't want to do that. So this is kind of causing a problem for when you're wanting to do something in a performant manner. This is kind of overeager. It might be overeager in how you're re-rendering things. Next, let's hook up the event listener or for the toggle direction button. Right now we are changing the direction, but we haven't. We still need to render the name here. So now we have foo bar, and now you can see we are re-rendering the name, but we're not changing this input. So then we need to grab our callback here, and we can see now when this updates, we're syncing that to this value. So now you can see that there's we're very closely connecting. When this button gets clicked, we're rendering the name. We're also syncing the direction of it. But we have to know that that's what this click button is doing, or we have to know everything that clicking this button is changing on the page. Here, and we're having to call render name in two different places. And it kind of keeps things a little bit, or it ties the events directly to their output. What proxies allow you to do, let's just get rid of these parts here. What proxies allow you to do is kind of centralize all of that logic in one place so that you're able to reason about it and see those changes and track those changes in a little bit of a better way. So here, what I want to do, or I want to change this to initial state, because you remember that the proxy takes an initial state, and then you work on the proxied object that it returns. We're going to set up that very simple trap handler that looks very much like that set that we did in the initial, as I was showing you what proxies were. And then what we can say is for any of the changes to state, whenever first, last, or direction gets changed, then we do need to render the name. So we know that. So we'll just, at this point, we can see, will this work? It works there. Anytime anytime the state is changed, we are going to render the name. And we can see that working there. We also can say limit the changes. So for instance, if the property equals first, so if we're changing the first name, then we will change the greeting. And here we can say every time, yeah, we can see that updates. But if we change that, we're not re-rendering the greeting, only if the change is here, and everything else works. We still need to update the direction form, or the direction field. So now if we click this, go back and forth, then we're actually toggling that value as well and keeping that in sync. But toggling that direction isn't re-rendering everything else. It's just doing the specific things that it needs. So you can see how we're consolidating concerns there. The event handlers don't need to care at all what is happening in response to those events. They're just setting the state, and then the state here, this proxy, is kind of sending out or coordinating the rendering that needs to happen in response.
So the demo code that you started with and what you ended up with didn't seem like a huge amount of, there wasn't a lot of changes there. And I know this is just a demo, but like, when would you want to use these?
Yeah, I think it probably is overkill for this example. But I think where it would really pay off is when you maybe come back in the future and you add a feature, and maybe a state value can be changed in a new way, or there's some new button that triggers some of that change, or there's a different conditional reaction or something like that. You don't need to remember all the ways changing a value might impact other things. You just change the value, and that kind of streams through to the right places. It's a way of centralizing that logic, so you can more easily find it in the future when you have to come back to it and reason about it when you're initially developing it.
That's neat. Are there other things you can do with the proxy state?
Yeah, the proxies it's a really powerful pattern. You could use the get handler to essentially add a computed property right in there. You could export your proxy state, so you can make those you can update values from other files, kind of really create a powerful state pattern there. Another possibility would be to implement this with signals, which are a new, I think, stage 1 proposal for JavaScript. It's a very low level way of getting reactivity. There's polyfill and some ways of doing that, which are linked in the show notes. But I was curious to see how we could use signals to do the same kind of form. So there's a whole bunch of specific signal setup that we won't get into immediately. You'll notice we have some of the same render functions that render the name, the for or the direction, the greeting, etc. And then we get to, actually, I'll show you down here. We also have the state changes where we're listening to the different changes. There's some minor changes that I'll quick talk about in a second. But what we do here is instead of setting up state as an object, we're just saying we have a first signal and a last and a direction, and they are just signal.state with their initial state values. And then we can come up with some computed values where we have our full name, which is computed signal, which is the first and last value just concatenated together. And then the display name is the full name, either reversed or forward, depending on the state. And the cool thing about signals is these computed values are only ever updated or run when they are read. So when there are changes to them, we will only look at or recompute these values when they are needed. We need to actually show them to users. So it's performant. It's really great for making sure we're not over eagerly changing things. Then when we need to show the actual values to people, we wrap them in an effect. Signals doesn't actually come with an effect feature. This is because this is something that each framework has to kind of figure out for itself, and it's really entwined with how they want to work. And so there's a lot of differences in that. So it's kind of up to users to figure out how to do that, or really frameworks to figure out how to do that. But really wrapping it in this effect, we just say render name, and we're going to render the display name. Sync direction, we're just going to sync the direction and update the greeting with the value of first. And all of this, we can see it works as expected. We're only re-rendering things when we're needing to. And here we're able to very much say, it's very much the same interface, but there's just kind of a different way of thinking about how we're managing the state and how we're reacting to that state. So what we can do here is very easily just say, we need to render the display name. We need to set the direction to what is correct and update the greeting to the first name. And all of that is just going to kind of happen and be computed based on when things get changed, and very performantly. Signals, as I said, doesn't include this effect value, but it is intended to be something where you can queue many changes and then just update your DOM when there's a batch that's ready to go. So it's a very performant, very interesting way of doing things. Again, this is probably even more specialized than proxies, or more of a specialized tool. It's probably, instead of the Phillips head tiny screwdriver, it's the star head tiny screwdriver that only opens my 2012 MacBook or something like that. That I probably don't need anymore. But this is going to be really powerful in powering, all of our UI frameworks and providing a standard way for them to kind of manage this state now.
So it sounds like it is a specialized tool, but a useful one if you need it. Are there times that you wouldn't recommend using proxies to manage state?
Yeah, I think there are definitely some times where you don't want to manage state. I think using a proxy, you definitely still want to find ways to manage state. But yeah, it's just one of many tools that you can use as needed. We're wanting to use this pattern where it's helpful to keep things simple. So if your use case is growing to a point where it isn't simple anymore, or it's just kind of outgrowing it, it might be not be the best use case anymore. If you're starting to abstract out concepts like computed or watch or effect or things like that, you're probably just replicating what other UI frameworks have already done and have tested, and they know how to handle all the edge cases and things like that. If you're needing to trigger callbacks or in other files and things like that, this is probably not the right pattern for you. And in a lot of cases, reach for something off the shelf like Vue or Svelte or something else that is well tested and can handle those concepts.
Now, we've used Vue and Svelte on projects.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you don't have to say which one, but have we used proxies to manage state recently?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, recently we're working on the Sass site. It's a code playground, so you can type in Sass and you can see the output in CSS to see your errors and things like that. And they didn't have they're a static site, and so they didn't have a state management or something to handle this. And after kind of looking around at a few different options, we realized we didn't want to pull in a build or more build complexity or more dependencies for them to manage. This likely will be a website that's around for 5-10 years, and so they were just keeping things to the web standards, and low maintenance was important. And so this code sandbox, there weren't a lot of moving parts. There was a couple of different settings you could put in, one input place, and then a few computed outputs and things that we needed to update in the DOM depending on those outputs. So it was a really, really useful way of centralizing that store.
All right, that brings us to a good place to wrap this up. So please visit oddbird.net/wingingit to access links and resources mentioned on today's show, or send us feedback and topic requests, or let us know if you have questions about how to use proxies. On the next Winging It, we'll discuss OddContrast, Oddbird's color contrast checker that includes all the newest color formats and spaces, Display P3 and OKLCH. So if you want a new tool that makes checking and converting your colors to a different space or format for easier copy and paste for all you designers out there, I love the tool, and it's really cool, and we'll walk you through it. If you'd like to support us, please like and subscribe. And if you want more from Oddbird, we invite you to check out our newsletter at oddbird.net/oddnews. Thank you, and remember, best practice is a conversation, so let's keep talking.